Hi, welcome back, everyone. It's been a while. I'm pretty sure I've covered this subject before, but I'm doing it again because I see the need to bring it up again. People keep talking about things where it's like, I wish I had something to point to. So, a lot of the anti-opiate stuff is based off of a particular study that was done, a review, a report. It was done in 2015 by a collection of people, two of which names really stand out to me, which is Andrew Kolodney. Andrew Kolodney was the main guy who published the review. And there's another guy on the review named Caleb Alexander. Caleb Alexander is a really, really interesting person. So, in this report, though, as I've read through, like, this is the legitimate report, and I will leave a link to it. It's a PDF file. I'll leave a link to it. You can go read it yourself, download it, whatever. You can read it yourself. Like, please, by all means, do, because some of this stuff, it's literally like, I read this, and it's astonishing to me that this has been used to pass policy and legislation with. I mean, really, like, if we're going to bring politics into the equation, your political affiliation has nothing to do with it. You could be left-wing, you could be right-wing, doesn't matter. This is bizarre. I mean, this is really bizarre. If you are on the left-wing, though, such as I, it's even more bizarre because a lot of this anti-opiate stuff in the beginning was perpetuated as a very leftist idea, but looking at the report, it's not very leftist in any way, shape, or form of the meaning of leftism or progressivism at all. Like, period. At all. There's a lot of racist undertones in this report, and it's just mesmerizing to me that this, something with so much racism and bias in it, ended up being used to create policy that has restricted millions of chronic pain patients from access to their pain medication. It's pretty wild. I mean, if I can read it, and, you know, like, I'm pretty layman, you know, like, I don't have a PhD, but if I can read this and go, like, and not take it seriously, how on earth was this presented in academia, peer-reviewed, and accepted? If I can see flaws in it, if I can see problems in it, if I'm reading it and it's like, there's a lot of funky stuff in this, there's an issue here. I've read studies before. This one is very, very, very bizarre. It's very bizarre, and I will show you. So remember to control prompt. What is it? Yeah. Okay. So this is the study that we're looking at. It's called the Prescription Opioid and Heroin Crisis: A Public Health Approach to an Epidemic of Addiction. Here's Mr. Andrew Kolodney's name right there. You have David D. Courtwright, Catherine S. I don't know how to say her last name. That's interesting. Peter something, John L. Thomas E. Clark, and then there's Caleb Alexander. Just to give you an idea of what a toxic human being Caleb Alexander is. See, that this is the thing that gets me, is like, Caleb Alexander is a epidemiologist that worked at the Cato Institute. And he supports and believes in a social Darwinist eugenics approach to chronic pain, chronic illness, and disability. That's not very leftist, and this guy is being used, and like a lot of leftists that produce anti-opiate arguments, a lot of their talking points come from these people. So, just to give you an idea of how toxic this Caleb guy. Here's a quote from Mr. Caleb Alexander. Bloomberg revealed the extent of his hostility to drugs in 2012 when he seemed to sympathize with Singapore's use of the death penalty against people who sell drugs. In lots of places, this is quoting Caleb Alexander, in lots of places in the Far East, they have signs up, "Death to drug dealers," he said. Think about the number of people who die from drug use here in this country, and yet we don't take it seriously enough to dissuade people. Executing a handful of people saves thousands and thousands of lives. Like I said, this guy, no joke, supports a eugenics, social Darwinist approach to chronic pain patients, the chronically ill, the disabled, and elderly. And this guy worked with Andrew Kolodney, and you can see that right here. See, here's his name, Caleb Alexander, came from the Cato Institute. So let me show you some of the things. Like, I'm not going to read through all of this. I have read through all of this, but I'm not going to do it in this video. This is really why I do encourage you to go and read this for yourself. So here we have, what is this? This is the green is the opioid sales, the red is the opioid deaths, and the blue is opioid treatment admissions. And, you know, they're all going up. It stops at 2010. This study came out, I don't know where to find it, but I know it came out in 2015. I know that. It came out in 2015 is when the study came out. But they stopped this at 2010. And the thing is that if you look at 2011, the chart, if you were to be able to look at 2011, the chart actually starts to decline in 2011. And they don't give us that data. They don't give us 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't have access to the data at the time because they were probably writing the report in 2014 and released it in 2015. But there's a lot of years, 2010 to 2015, that are missing. We're missing the data on. And here we have the percent of all heroin admissions. This is what I find funny here. This is really, really interesting. Look at these charts. Look at the name of this chart. Non-Hispanic white. Then look at this chart. Non-Hispanic black. Is when we're doing an epidemiology, a study on epidemiology. If we're doing a study on that, is that how we categorize people? Is that really what we do? They almost might as well not even include the non-Hispanic in there. They might as well have just said white people and black people. That's the problem with this. If you say non-Hispanic white people, you are talking about white people only of European descent. And if you say non-Hispanic black people, I mean, here in the United States, essentially you're saying African-American people, really, is what you're saying in there. So nobody from the Middle East, no Asian people, no one from India or China or anything like that, no immigrants from there. Literally no other demographic. It's literally just black and white people that they looked at. And this is the thing that I also find interesting, is that really the only use that you see an increase in is white people. It's right here. And that's from 2001 to 2011. And again, eventually, like after 2011, this actually starts to decline. But, you know, they don't show that in here. And that red is age bracket 20 to 34. So in actually people who are non-Hispanic, so basically African-American people, like specifically black people in America, because that's what this means. This is not how you guys, this is not how you do a study. This is not real science. This is not even real social science. Like you have to look at all demographics of people. You don't just look at white American people and black American people and call it a day. You have to look at all demographics. But this is really interesting to me because even the demographic of the white demographic of people, the age bracket, that is an increase. Even in the black demographic of people, it's really, really low, across the age brackets. The one with the most use is elderly people in the black category. And that's probably because, well, I mean, if you're living in poverty, which a lot of black people are due to some issues there in the United States, well, you end up probably self-medicating for chronic pain, and as you get older, the more and more your body is going to start to hurt and ache, and the more you will need to be able to manage pain. And if you're not able to get to a doctor and get other sources or means of managing pain, such as gabapentinoids, if those work for you, or various types of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, or even steroidal anti-inflammatories, your chances of getting those living in poverty without health insurance are very, very minuscule. So, This is probably why you see that in that age bracket. But overall, it would seem the Black community here in the United States, relatively low use, like extremely low use. So one of the things that I've pointed out is that they really didn't seem to care about the use. There's even a part in this report where they acknowledge that they realize heroin use was an uprise since the Vietnam War, but it was mostly due to people who lived in the ghetto, and they did go on to define the ghetto as a culturally and ethnically diverse place of mostly people in poverty. This report literally says, I mean, it says it in I suppose a roundabout way, but I mean, it's not very hidden. It's pretty obvious what they're referring to when they say it. They're basically saying, we didn't care about the heroin use before because it was just a bunch of people of color living in the hood, and the white people that were using it were just poor white people that we didn't care about. We really didn't care about it until young upper middle class white people started using it. And this is a bastardization of how you use science. It's not what you do. That's not how you do that. And like I said, if you look beyond this 2011, like going into 2012, this number actually, this little red one here on the white side, actually starts to go down. I'm astonished that this is acceptable. I've seen studies before. You know, I've read studies. I've never seen a study that would be peer reviewed and accepted that is like, we're only looking at white and Black people. That's it. And then boom, you know, we have a problem just based off of that. So here's where they even show it, the number of users, the use growth. So here you can see like, in 2001 we have this huge spike, and then look, it's coming down. So they're showing in their own report that the use of illicit opiates that we're aware of started to go down, actually somewhere around 2001, and continued in a downward trend going to 2011. And like I said, this report came out in 2015. So you have 12, 13, and 14. And then when 2016 happened, this number went like that. It went off the charts when they took away opioid medications from chronic pain patients. Then they have this broken down by age group. So this is cute, though. I mean, like, I don't know that this means much that you break it down to age group, because they already did that up here, really. But if you're only looking at non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic Blacks, this really doesn't... I don't know that it tells you much. And... this is non-medical use by age. And you know, I'm really not surprised that the largest age group that uses opiates for non-medical purposes are younger people. I mean, younger people tend to like to... They're more willing to take risks to do drugs to get high. The older you get, the less likely you do such things. And this is related unintentional overdose deaths by age. And this is really problematic because we're not really sure how they define an unintentional overdose, because I've seen this in real time. Someone, a chronic pain patient, committing suicide by deliberately overdosing on their medication. And a lot of, like, you know, sometimes there's a lot of people who live in poverty, okay? And I think the police do this as a favor to the family that lives in poverty. They write up the report, even though it's very obvious. Like, nobody just accidentally takes an entire, like, oops, I just took every single pill in the entire bottle. I don't know how you accidentally take 60 pills. I don't know how you do that. Very obviously an overdose, but the police have wrote up the report. I've seen this in real life. This happened to a friend of mine's father. He overdosed, and the police wrote the report as an unintentional overdose, even though it was clearly intentional. And the FDA has actually asked the CDC, how did you gather this data? How do you know that they died from an opiate death, or a combination of opiates with other substances, or another substance that they took that they actually overdosed on, but they just happened to have opiates in their system? And the CDC said, well, we don't make that differential. And the FDA said, well, that's not how we do science. And they're right. That's not how we do science. That's not, you don't go, oh, they had, 5 milligrams of opiates in their system and, a blood alcohol content of like 25.14. They must have died from opiates. That's not how we do that. But that's essentially what the CDC did, and the FDA called them out on that. Yeah, and I want to reiterate that. So this is not like hearsay. This is literally one government agency that has medical advisors and all that good stuff challenging another government agency with the same kind of resources, basically saying like, we don't like how you gathered the data on this, because that's not how you gather data for epidemiology for the purposes of that. That's not what you do. I'm having trouble with that word today for some reason. What is this? Rate of stays. That's probably referring to rehab. 1993 compared to 2012. I mean, it just shows you people are more willing to go to rehab in 2012 than in 1993. I don't know that tells us much of anything. Like I said, I'm not gonna. I've read through this. I don't want to. I encourage you to go read through it, but I do have some screenshots of some caps. But if you're doing a study on epidemiology on the effects that opioids have on a population, you don't just go out there and say, okay, we're only going to look at white people, and then go, oh my God, like, all these white people are doing X substance, therefore X substance is affecting 99% of the overall population that includes a bunch of demographics of people that we didn't even look at. That's not how you do this. It's unbelievable that this passed as a legitimate study, that this was acceptable. This is not acceptable. This wouldn't have been acceptable even in the 90s. It's unbelievable. And the fact that they even show the trend started, that there was a downward trend, and they took the opioid pain medications away from chronic pain patients, and then the trend went up. It's not good. So, yeah, I do have screenshots. So we're gonna, hold on. Okay. Anyway. So, I know I showed this. So, this one. Neonatal absence syndrome, moreover, from 1997 to 2011, there was a 900% increase in individuals seeking treatment for addiction to OPRs. The correlation, love these, between opioid sales and OPR-related overdose deaths and treatment seeking for opioid addiction is striking. You do not, in science, come or even try to make a conclusion based off of a correlation. And they admit it right here in the document itself, and the study that made the guidelines for 2016, it says that it's nothing more than a correlation. Again, embarrassing. This is phenomenal. How is this used to pass law? Addiction is defined as, this is in Andrew Kolodney's little report here. It says addiction is defined as continued use of a drug despite negative consequences. Opiates are highly addictive because they include or induce euphoria, positive reinforcement, and cessation of chronic use produces dysphoria. Negative reinforcement. Chronic exposure to opioids results in structural and functional changes in regions of the brain that mediate affect, impulse, reward, and motivation. The disease of opioid addiction arises repeated exposure to opioids and can account, I'm assuming this is account, I don't know why this is, individuals using opioids to relieve pain and in non-medical users. So there's a problem with the way he's defining addiction. There's really kind of two ways you can look at addiction. One, there's the addiction as an obsessive compulsive behavior, which is why people can get addicted to things that do not produce chemical dependency. And this euphoria that he talks about here is really kind of my suspicion on why society does this sort of stuff, because it's like, why are opiates bad? Well, if you make the argument that opioid pain medications for the treatment of chronic pain are bad because they produce a chemical dependency, which is where if you remove the chemical from the body, you have you'll have withdrawal symptoms. That's chemical dependency. That could also be described as addiction. That could, I mean, people have used it that way, but that's chemical dependency. So if that's the argument that opioids are bad, I would say, well, that's a poor argument, because the reality is every single psychiatric medication that exists produces chemical dependency. There are other medications that produce chemical dependency, such as diuretics. Those produce chemical dependency. Laxatives produce chemical dependency. Your body can become dependent on laxatives to be able to pass a bowel movement. You can develop a chemical dependency on Benadryl. If you take Benadryl for a long period of time, like I did this, I took Benadryl for a long time to help me sleep. And for swing shifts, I was working swing shifts, so sleeping was difficult. So I used Benadryl as sort of a sleeping pill. And then I stopped, and it's like my body had to readjust to producing its own antihistamine, and treated just the very air I breathed. I have some allergies, but I don't have allergies like that for real. Like, the allergies I have are very, very specific. There's something in the ocean that I'm allergic to. But I don't have allergies. I don't walk around sneezing and stuff like that. Like, I'm not allergic to dust and rabbits and cat and mold and stuff like that. But when I stopped taking the Benadryl, I was sneezing for like 2 or 3 days straight. So, I mean, that's definitively a chemical dependency. Gabapentinoids produce chemical dependency. There's a lot. I mean, like, I don't have time to go through. And there's also the aspect, is heart meds chemical dependency? Because it's like, if you take away the heart medication, it's not necessarily that the person with heart failure or heart disease or chronic heart failure, it's not necessarily that they're going through withdrawals. But if you take away the medication, they could die. So they are, by definition, dependent on that medication. Same with insulin. I don't have time to go through every medication that exists, but so that can't possibly be it, because we account for that. We know, we consider that as far as the risks and benefits to medications. Chemical dependency is a risk that is assessed and is talked about by doctors. We know that. So and opioids are not the only ones that do that. So that can't possibly be it. That can't be your reason. If that were the reason, then modern medical science would not be where it's at. We would have to make a lot of medications illegal that are very, 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 very important. So no, I don't buy into that. So what else is there? Oh, but you can overdose on them. Again, this is a piss poor argument. You can overdose on anything. I mean, I could be ridiculous. I mean, I could say you can overdose on water. I'm not talking about drowning either. You can literally overdose on water. But you can drink so much water that you have to go to the ER. I did not know this was possible until a friend of mine, her mother, did this and had to go to the ER because she overdosed on water. Very strange thing to happen, but yeah, this is possible. You can overdose on pretty much every medication that's sold over the counter. I mean, you can overdose on Benadryl. It's actually not hard to do that. You can overdose on sleeping pills. You can overdose on Tylenol. Again, that's very easy to do. You can overdose on NSAIDs like ibuprofen. You can overdose on every single psychiatric medication that exists. You can overdose on a lot of stuff. And when we patent medications, there's a certain death rate that we kind of expect due to bad reactions or negative side effects. Due to allergic reactions and even overdose, but we're not taking those off the market. So I don't buy that that's really the case or a good argument, is that because there's the potential, like the only way it's going to kill you is if you take more than your body can handle and overdose. That's the only way. I do not buy that that's the reason why we're doing this, because that would mean if that's the reason, then we're going to have to take pretty much every medication off the market. Like, no more medications at all. None. You can't have them. So what else is there? What is the major difference between opioid medications and all these other medications? It's right there. It produces euphoria. And I think that that's really what it is. I think that's why society has hangups with sex. I think that's why they have a hangup with weed, even though there's no real deaths associated with weed. I think that's why society has a problem with hallucinogens. I think it's why society has a problem with drugs in general. I think society has this sort of puritanical view on things and tends to get very ridiculous moral hangups on things that make us feel good. I think that's ultimately what it boils down to. It's the only thing that I can definitively say that differentiates opioids from other medications and the arguments that are given. Another important feature of opioid addiction epidemic is the relationship between ORP use and heroin use. According to the federal government's National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 4 out of 5 current heroin users report that their opioid use began with opioid prescribed, I assume, I forget what the OPRs mean. Many of these individuals appear to be switching to heroin after becoming addicted to OPRs because heroin is less expensive on the black market. For example, in a recent sample of opioid addicted individuals who switched from ORPs to heroin, 94% reported doing so because ORPs were far more expensive and harder to obtain. This is why when you took opioid pain medications away from chronic pain patients, the use of illicit opioids went through the roof, is because you took, like, and let's stop pretending that this just happens with opioids. This happens with anyone who's unmedicated. Right now, one of the top selling medications or top selling drugs this cartels sell, because of all the patient abandonment that is going on related to this anti-opioid stuff, related to anti-HRT, like hormone therapy for trans people stuff, related to all this legislation that makes women's reproductive health really hard for doctors to do without facing prison time. You know, like that's what these prohibitions do, is that, well, you know what, if you can't get your HRT from a doctor, which is a controlled and regulated source that has a lot of care taken into it, and a medical expert that oversees your overall health, well, they go to the deep web and they go to the street for their hormones. Or if you're a woman and you need an abortion, or you have like a fetus that's dead and could go septic, you go to back alleyway abortions. And there's also, I mean, oh, I was getting to that. The number one top selling drug the cartels sell right now, because of all these abandoned patients, because no doctor will touch them. Their top selling drug right now is antibiotics. So it doesn't have to do with expensive. You can cross that out. It's just it's really hard to obtain. It's easier to obtain heroin than it is to get your medication. It's easier to obtain HRT off the street than to get it from a physician. It's easier to get an abortion off the street than it is from a physician, especially if you're in a southern state now. So this shouldn't be surprising at all, and it's almost like they're completely ignoring the aspect that this is confirmation bias. It's like we want to make something specifically and solely designed to attack opioids, and we don't care about any nuance because we just want to attack opioids. We don't care about the aspect that if we actually made it easier to obtain prescription opioids, they wouldn't be going to heroin. We're not going to talk about that. Which, by the way, would be a safe supply and way less likely to overdose. Because I know the libertarians, like I remember Michael Moove said, you mean to tell me that in a market economy, buying the drug would be safer? It's like, well, I mean, you know, the drug cartels are essentially, if you want to see true ANCAP, true capitalism with no regulations, no control, look no further than the drug cartels, because that's exactly what they do. They are not held to any standard at all, period. We say that it's in the business owner's best interest to look at the consumer's best interest to continue business. We say that. It doesn't seem like the drug cartel really care that much. And in fact, a death will actually improve their business because people go, oh my God, they got the good shit. So no, I don't think black markets are the answer. I don't think the key point is control and regulation. That's what makes it safe, is control and regulation. Standards. This increased prevalence of opioid addiction has also been associated with increases in heroin-related morbidity and mortality. For example, since 2001, heroin addiction treatment admissions for whites ages 20 to 34 have increased sharply. During this time frame, heroin overdose deaths among whites ages 18 to 44 increased by 171%. This, again, why are we looking at whites and not the overall population? This is a problem. This is not how we configure an epidemic, is by looking at one demographic of people. Unless there's like something that specifically affects a demographic of people. Like, for example, right now, amongst chronic pain patients and the disabled, suicide rates are up by 700%. And there's a doctor that wants to investigate that, because when you see suicide rates amongst a demographic spike like that, it should be of medical interest for public health and safety. But this demographic is not specifically whites. It's white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Middle Eastern people, any type of people that live here in the United States who happens to be debilitated by chronic pain or a chronic pain patient. For some reason, anyone who has chronic pain, their risk of suicide has just increased exponentially, like on the turn of a dime. Like it from 2016, suddenly it shot up 700%. That a 700% increase in suicide is not something you ignore. And there was a person who I think it was Anna Lemke, tried to get that doctor to literally went out of her way to try to make it so that that doctor did not investigate why chronic pain patient suicide rates were so high. The CDC basically does not want anyone to investigate that, which is really, really bizarre. And we've seen this chart. I went over this already. The epidemic had diverse origins. Mothers dosed themselves and their children with opium tinctures and patent medicines. Soldiers used opium and morphine to treat diarrhea and painful injuries. Drinkers alleviated hangovers with opioids. Chinese immigrants smoked opium, a practice that spread to the white underworld, but the main source of the epidemic was iatrogenic morphine addiction, which coincided with the spread of hypodermic medication during 1870 through 1895. The model opioid-addicted individual was a native-born white woman with a painful disorder, often of a chronic nature. See, this is what I mean. It's white. The incidence of non-medical ORP use increased sharply in the late 1990s, peaking in 2002 with 2.7 million new non-medical users. I really, really doubt there are 2.7 million non-medical users, but okay. Since 2002, the incidence of non-medical use has gradually declined. He admits this, to 1.8 million in 2012. And honestly, you don't really know how many non-medical users there are because a lot of people who use illegal drugs are not going to be honest about that. Although the number of new non-medical users has declined, overdose, deaths, addiction, treatment admissions, and other adverse public health outcomes associated with OPR use have increased dramatically since 2002. But here's the thing, there's nothing linking prescribed opiate medication use to this. And another thing that they don't talk about is a lot of people who use heroin, who were using opiate medications, that were not prescribed to them. So they were still using illegal opioids. That's the thing. I mean, you know, that's called pill popping. You know, people do that when they're to get high. They find opioid medications and take them to get high off of opioids without having to go to heroin, because the idea in the drug world is, well, heroin's really addictive, but it's a lot easier to take a hydrocodone, which is codeine, and only lasts for 4 hours, and it's a lot harder to develop a chemical dependency to. Some opioid manufacturers have reformulated ORPs to make them more difficult to misuse. This is something that I find very interesting, is that Andrew Kolodney and the people who created this report even admit this. And this is what they went after pharmaceutical companies for. It says specifically, and they were saying, pharmaceutical companies, they're making what's essentially heroin. And they're admitting in here, they're formulated to be harder to abuse through an intranasal or injection route. Meaning, to snort or inject. Like you can't inject codeine. You'll have an embolism. It's not injectable. These so-called abuse deterrent formulations may offer safety advantages over easily snorted and injected OPRs, but they do not render them less addictive. But I don't know. Opioid addiction in both medical and non-medical OPR users most frequently develops through oral use. I don't know about that. Some opioid-addicted individuals may transition to intranasal or injection use, but most continue to use OPRs orally. Thus, ADS should not be considered. This is a really silly reason to say that medications that have been manufactured or reformulated to be harder to be abused should not be considered a primary prevention strategy for opioid addiction. That's ridiculous. We went over that chart already, and that's it. But, yeah. I wanted to go over that again because if you read through that report, there's just a lot of things in it that don't make sense. He admits, they straight out admit, opioid medications are deliberately manufactured to be harder to be abused. And if you're going to develop a medication that isn't going to be abused, good luck, because, I mean, people will find a way. I don't know that you can stop that. I don't know that there's any such thing as a society that's completely sober, that where we don't do anything that is intoxicating at all. I don't know that this exists at all. Period.
This is what harm reduction is supposed to be about, is acknowledging
you can't stop drug use. Even in the countries where they have the death penalty, you can't stop drug use. And I don't know why you would resort to such a human right violation as putting someone to death than just saying, you know what, we can't stop it, but you know what we can do? We can make it safer by giving a safe supply that is controlled and regulated. And there are countries that have done this when it comes to opioids. In fact, right now, marijuana is a great example of this. It is dangerous to buy marijuana off the street from the cartels because we have found weed that has been laced with fentanyl. And I, personally, my sister-in-law has known 2 girls. One of them is dead from a fentanyl overdose because she smoked weed that was laced with fentanyl and died. And she knows another one that was having withdrawals from her marijuana and was like, she's like, this is so weird. Like, I know marijuana isn't addictive like that for real. And she went to the doctor, peed dirty for fentanyl, and she brought the weed in, they tested it and found fentanyl in it. Now, the clinics around are passing out flyers warning people, do not buy weed off the street, get it from a dispensary. Because if you buy it from a dispensary, it is 100% guaranteed fentanyl free. I mean, yeah, prohibitions don't work. They don't. And we've extended the already existing prohibitions to cover, like, the whole reason why we have the Controlled Substances Act is because doctors were saying some of these things you are making illegal have medical application. And some of the things that we do medically are not possible without them. That is why the Controlled Substances Act was born, was to grant doctors permission, the ability to have access to these drugs because they have medical application. And this stuff is basically rendering it useless.
If you want to deal with addiction,
I have no idea why they're pulling this medical stuff into the equation. Them doing that was very, very rude and inconsiderate, because a lot of the people, the majority of people taking opioid medications, or that were used to be on, now you can't fucking get them. Majority of people who are taking opioid medications, I mean, these are people who are debilitated by chronic pain. And a lot of them, after their opioids have been just abruptly taken from them, the little amount of functionality or ability that they got from the opioid medication is gone. So you had someone who used to be able to get out of bed and at least make breakfast for their family before they go off to school or work or whatever, and their opioids have now been taken away from them for 4 or 5 years, and they've been bedbound for 4 or 5 years because they don't have access to their pain meds anymore. You know, that's just what we've done. We've basically, what they've done is they've taken away the safest opioids you could possibly get your hands on, leaving the population, the society, with the worst possible opioids you could possibly get your hands on. If the goal was to divert people away from heroin and illicit fentanyl, the worst thing you could possibly do would be to take away and make it even harder to access the safest opioids that are nowhere near like heroin and are definitely not going to have fentanyl in them. And that's what they did. How does that rationale work? And then you wonder why, like, there's actually, from Caleb Alexander, I have it here. Let me see if I can find that. No, I don't have it here. Hold on. Yes, I do. I have to get it. Hold on. Give me a minute. I just have to look for it. Give me a second. Nope. No, not there. Here we go. It's right here. Caleb Alexander. This Caleb Alexander. This was by Caleb Alexander from the Cato Institute, the guy who believes in eugenics and social Darwinist approach to chronic pain, chronic illness, disability, and the elderly. Findings: between 2010 and 2019, opioid prescribing declined by 42.5%, although fatal opioid overdoses increased by 103.2%. So, and now that it's 2023, opioid prescribing is actually more down. It's down more like 70 to 80%, almost non-existent. And the overdose rates have increased over 103%. And then he goes on to say these reduction in opioid prescribing averted an estimate of 9,600 people. Where does he get this? Like, we saved 9,600 people's lives, even though fatal opioid overdoses increased by 103% after we reduced opioid prescribing. How do you figure that you saved 9,600 people's lives? Starting in 2011, relative to continued prescribing at 2010 levels, and are projected to avert another 50,918 overdose deaths between 2020 and 2029. The median time from initial opioid prescription to fatal opioid overdose was 5.2 years of the 2.4 million individuals in the United States with estimated active opiate use disorder in 2019. Again, this is, like, we reduced opioid prescribings by almost 50%, and overdoses increased by 103%. But you know what? Aha, you guys, we did it. We reduced opioid overdose deaths, even though they've increased by 103%. How how is this considered acceptable? You're reading it straight from the this is Caleb Alexander. I know it doesn't show it in the screenshot, but this is a publication by Caleb Alexander from the Cato Institute. Unbelievable. And I think you can find this on the JAMA Network too. So that's interesting. I don't know how you come to that conclusion. Aha, overdoses have increased exponentially. It worked. We reduced opioid overdose deaths, even though they've increased by taking opioid medications away from people. But they increased. That's literally a document, a report made by somebody who works with these institutions. It's unbelievable. Like, I don't, at any other point in time, if that were peer reviewed, it would be rejected. Just hands down. That this is what am I in the twilight zone? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean it worked? Overdose rates skyrocketed through the roof, but you're telling me it worked. What what you're saying is contradictory, and they're like, seal of approval. I mean, weird. Anyway, like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you think in the comment section below. I will leave a link to Mr. Andrew Kolodney's report, and I strongly advise that you go read it for yourself, and you can see the hypocrisy and the racism right there in it. It's pretty blatant to me. It's not secret. It's not hush. It's not like dog whistles. It's pretty blatant racism. And that's the document that we use to take a medication away from a group of people that helps them function. And I go out and I hear people regurgitate talking points from that document, and they think that they're fighting the good fight. And it's like, well, you're regurgitating talking points from a report that was incredibly racist. Incredibly. It's astonishing. Like, how is this happening? How are people falling for this? It's stigmatization. Opiates have always had a bad rep, and even in the drug world, heroin's had a bad reputation. Even in the world of drugs, it's always had a bad reputation. Most people would consider it the only reason you should ever be taking an opioid, ever, is if a doctor prescribes it to you because you have a medical condition and you need it. And that's been taken away. This is unbelievable. It's like, what is happening? Why is this happening? And now you have all these chronic pain patients that can't find doctors running around going like, I need medical attention. I need medical attention. Not even just to get opioids, just for simple things like getting a stupid physical done. You can't even get that done. They won't touch you. Like, the moment you're like, oh, they're like, oh, okay, so why don't you tell us about yourself? Well, I have neurogenic thoracic outlet syndrome. Oh, I'm sorry. We're not taking on any new patients. I've been told we're not taking on any new patients. I've had the phone just literally hung up in my face and no return calls. And I've outright been told, I'm sorry, but your condition is too rare and complicated. We won't touch it. Yep. So it's fantastic. But you've heard it straight from the horse's mouth. Andrew Kolodney, Caleb, all of these. Caleb is an epidemiologist, but a lot of these anti-opioid doctors are psychiatrists and psychologists that specialize in addiction. They don't really deal with chronic pain patients on the medical side. So, but you heard it for themselves. They don't really care what happens to us. The way that they're viewing it is, we're letting. Now, really, what it is they're letting like 1 million people die to save something like 75,000 people's lives. The way that they see it is they're letting they're letting 1 million people die to save 1.5 million people's lives. That's the way they view it. But really, it's more like we're going to let 1 million people die to save 75,000 people's lives. Yeah. This is twisted. This is twisted. I can't believe this is happening. It's freaking twisted. Please read reports. Please read things. Please stop. Don't just get information and believe it. Read this report. Read this. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, I'm telling you, the left has not become more radical. It's the right wing. You know, like this is eugenics type stuff. This is social Darwinist stuff. This is literally something that Hitler did to chronic pain patients. It's called Action T4. Go look it up. Go read about it. Anyway, I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah.